This is Chapel of the Pines, a more than a century-old crematorium and columbarium here in Los Angeles. It hosts the remains of numerous Hollywood legends, a handful of which can be found right here in the columbarium. But if you saw our previous video on Chapel of the Pines, you'll recall that the majority of the stars whose cremated remains rest here are locked away in a private vault, inaccessible to the public. Well, today, for the first time, we're teaming up with our friends here at Chapel of the Pines to give you an exclusive look inside the vault. This is the story of Chapel of the Pines. Chapel of the Pines is located at 1605 South Catalina Street, adjacent to Angelus Rosedale Cemetery, not far from downtown Los Angeles. This domed structure, inspired by classical Greek architecture, was built around 1903, and at that time was known as the Los Angeles Crematory Association. The earliest recorded cremation here was listed as taking place in 1906. By the 1940s, the crematory was bought by Pierce Brothers and became the Pierce Brothers Crematorium. Finally, around 1948, it was given the name as we know it today, Chapel of the Pines. In 1991, it was bought out by a large corporation known as SCI. Then finally in 2006, Chapel of the Pines was bought by the current owners, Community Funeral Services. Circling the chapel on the second level are a series of columbariums, or columbaria, that radiate out from the center of the building. This is where most of the early occupants of Chapel of the Pines were inurned, in beautifully rustic and retro urns and niche facades. Later decades saw the corridors on the main level, Deodora Hall North and Deodora Hall South, and then the chapel host niches for cremated remains. Here in these columbaria, we found a number of stars and Hollywood legends in our original video on Chapel of the Pines. Let's take a moment to recap who's here. In Deodora Hall South, there's husband and wife Stuart Erwin and June Collyer. Stuart was an actor of stage, screen, and television, nominated for an Oscar for his role in 1936's Pigskin Parade. Stu had his own TV show, Trouble with Father, later retitled The Stu Erwin Show, which co-starred his real-life wife, June Collyer. June is also remembered for her role as Jean in A Face in the Fog and Gloria in The Ghost Walks. A few columns in on the left is a name you fans of Laurel and Hardy will recognize, Mae Busch. Her career began in the silent era, where she was best known as a vamp in films like The Unholy Three. In 1929, she began her association with Laurel and Hardy, sometimes playing Hardy's shrewish wife, appearing in more than a dozen of their comedies. Edgar Deering was never a leading man, but appeared in more than 300 film and television productions. He was often typecast as motorcycle policemen on screen. His films include It Came from Outer Space, and his final appearance on screen was in the original Twilight Zone series in the episode Mr. Garrity and the Graves. Lyle Wheeler was a prolific art director in Hollywood, designing sets for close to 400 productions in his career. He was nominated for an astounding 22 Academy Awards, winning 5 for Gone with the Wind, Anna and the King of Siam, The Robe, The King and I, and The Diary of Anne Frank. Willis O'Brien was an early special effects and stop-motion effects pioneer in Hollywood, responsible for some of the best-known images in movie history. Most notably, he did the stop-motion creature animation for films like 1925's The Lost World and 1933's King Kong. His visual effects for 1950's Mighty Joe Young won the Oscar. His work would inspire the likes of Ray Harryhausen and Peter Jackson. Kathryn Williams was an actress and screenwriter, principally of the silent era. She's remembered as a spry, blonde beauty whose daring antics made her the star of Hollywood's first cliffhanger adventure serial, 1913's The Adventures of Kathryn. Later, she'd be known more for dramas like Our Dancing Daughters, appearing in close to 200 films before retiring from the screen in 1935. Kathryn also wrote 6 screenplays, including A Sultana of the Desert, in which she also starred. Into the chapel now, we find the niche of Leonard Carey, an English actor known for often playing butlers. His best-known role was as Ben in Hitchcock's Rebecca. He appeared in more than 150 productions, as well as on the London stage. Into Deodora Hall North now. Here is where we find the niche of Lloyd Ingraham, a distinguished actor who often played authority figures. He appeared in D.W. Griffith's silent masterpiece Intolerance, as well as numerous B-westerns. In addition to his 300-plus acting credits, Lloyd also directed some 100 films, many of them silent westerns. Just a few rows away from Lloyd is the niche of Nigel Bruce. You fans of Sherlock Holmes will remember Nigel for his role as Dr. Watson in the Sherlock Holmes films of the 30s and 40s, and also on radio.
What brings you from Northumberland at this early hour?
A bad business, Holmes. A very bad business. How do you know that I came from Northumberland?
Elementary, my dear Watson.
He's also known for his roles in those classic Hitchcock films, Rebecca and Suspicion. He was just 58 when he died from a heart attack. We're upstairs now in the older columbarium. Arthur Hoyt was another of those actors who didn't always get screen credit, but worked prolifically in close to 300 films, like The Lost World and It Happened One Night. There was one notable Hollywood pioneer that I was unable to find for our first video here, and this time around it became apparent why. We're down in the lower level, the Hall of Memory. According to the records here, motion picture pioneer William Selig was inurned in Section H. So we came over here to Section H, and after scouring every single nameplate, there was no sign of him. But we did find his wife, Mary Selig. Curiously, just above Mary was a nameplate of someone named Leslie, which looked like it had fallen off and been taped back on. In fact, over the decades, several of these simple acrylic markers had fallen off, with someone having attempted to tape some of them back on. Well, I had a theory that perhaps William Selig's nameplate had fallen off, as had this one belonging to Leslie, which had then been taped back on in the wrong place. I believed that it was actually William in the niche above his wife Mary. So I asked Chapel of the Pines if they'd be willing to open up the niche so we could confirm this. And lo and behold, there he was. It was indeed William Selig in the niche above his wife. So we moved Leslie's nameplate back to where she was supposed to be, and I had a new nameplate made for William, since his was now lost. Now, after the backstory of having found him, who was William Selig? He was a motion picture pioneer from the very early days of film. Early in his career, he performed on the vaudeville stage as Colonel Selig, a name which he would use the rest of his career as a film producer. In 1896, Selig created one of the very first film production companies, Selig Polyscope, in Chicago. His film, The Tramp and the Dog, produced that same year, is considered the first narrative film set in Chicago. By the early 1900s, Selig was producing the first westerns of Bronco Billy Anderson, and was one of the first filmmakers to expand his operations to the West Coast, right here in Los Angeles, partly for the year-round good weather, and partly to escape Thomas Edison's cartel monopoly on filmmaking from the East Coast. In 1909, he founded the first permanent studio in Los Angeles. Throughout his career, he would produce more than 2,000 films, including the first film adaptations of The Wizard of Oz, and the first true serial, The Adventures of Kathryn, starring Kathleen Williams, who we found upstairs. In 1948, Colonel William Selig was given an honorary Academy Award for his pioneering contributions to the motion picture industry. He died months later from a coronary thrombosis at the age of 84. Heading outside now, in front of the main building, you'll find the Garden of Memories, also known as the Rose Garden, with a half wall featuring names of those whose cremains were scattered therein or elsewhere. Among them, Colin Clive, an actor famous for playing Dr. Frankenstein in the classic 1930s horror films Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein.
It's alive! Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Other films include Mad Love and Christopher Strong. Clive struggled with severe alcoholism and died from tuberculosis at just 37. This marker is just a cenotaph, as his ashes were reportedly scattered at sea. Just this summer, some new names have been added to the wall, including Bess Flowers, whose ashes were scattered here in the Rose Garden. Her name was misspelled, but they promised to fix it, so in the meantime, I'll use movie magic to fix it. Bess Flowers was an actress known as the Queen of Hollywood Extras, becoming much in demand by the 1930s. Extras are those you see on screen in the background that don't have any spoken lines. It's estimated that Bess appeared in more than 1,000 productions. She holds the record for the number of appearances in films nominated for Best Picture, 23 in all, 5 of which won Best Picture. Bess Flowers died in 1984 at age 85. We found the record of actress Jean Hagen in the records room, but it's unclear what became of her cremated remains. Disposal, Chapel of the Pines, could mean scattering in the Rose Garden or perhaps placement in vaultage, but we didn't find her in the vault. So Jean might be a good candidate for addition to this memorial garden wall. Jean was an actress remembered for playing Lena in Singin' in the Rain, for which she was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. She also played Margaret Williams on The Danny Thomas Show, which earned her 3 Emmy nominations. She was just 54 when she died from cancer in 1977. Other stars were cremated here and their ashes taken or scattered elsewhere, like Alan Napier, who played Alfred on the Batman TV series. His ashes were scattered at his family estate. And Jay Silverheels, remembered for his role as Tonto in The Lone Ranger, whose ashes were scattered on the Six Nations Indian Reserve. And Ross Bagdasarian, known as David Seville, who created the cartoon band Alvin and the Chipmunks. According to the records, his ashes were sent to Ararat Cemetery in Fresno. Even silent vamp Theda Bara was cremated here before interment in the Great Mausoleum. But for close to a century, thousands of cremated remains that were not placed in a niche in the columbaria, or taken elsewhere by the family, or scattered, ended up down in the vault. The first time I visited Chapel of the Pines years ago for our first video here, I was only able to access the public columbarium. What this elusive vault was, that one reads about online, was left wholly to the imagination. In my mind, I pictured an average-sized storage room, dark and disheveled with dingy shelves and a few hundred haphazardly stacked urns. I couldn't have been more wrong. The only thing that lived up to the vision was the door to room 1, which was literally a vault door, with a combination lock and everything. The first thing I was surprised to discover was that when speaking of the vault, or vaultage, at Chapel of the Pines, it's not just one room, but actually a network of 5 rooms, 5 vaults. When one filled up, they spilled over to the next and the next. Walking into the vault for the first time, I was instantly struck by the sheer numbers. Thousands of simple box urns, neatly arranged on shelves, floor to ceiling, 2 stories high, row after row after row. And I'll be honest, it made me think of Ollivanders from Harry Potter. It also reminded me of a library. Each of these box urns, neatly labeled on the front with the individual's name, was like a book on a shelf. A book of life with countless untold stories within. But putting the metaphorical aside for the literal, these urns contain cremated human remains, which are commonly called ashes. Something of a misnomer, as the remains after cremation consist mainly of bone fragments and minerals. These vaults weren't dark and disheveled, but very well lit, and for the most part pretty well organized, by month and year. There was actually a strange sort of beauty to it. A century-long timeline of humanity. Time, the elements, and pests were not kind to some of these urns, but given that many date back over 100 years, most of them were in surprisingly good condition, the labels still legible. When the current owners took over, the vaults were in pretty poor condition. There was an entire layer of mud on the floors that they had to clean up, so those poor souls on the bottom row tended not to fare as well as others higher up. But after cleanup and improved lighting, a sense of dignity was restored to these individuals' final resting place. Since the current owners took over in 2006, long-term storage of ashes like this is no longer allowed. They essentially inherited the vault as is. The latest cremations we found in here were around 2005, when placement in vaultage stopped. Nowadays, cremated remains must be either inurned, scattered, or taken by the family. Any cremains left unclaimed after 60 days are now sent to the LA coroner. So these vaults are a vestige of a bygone era, a snapshot of the past. You would not see anything like this today. In fact, there may not be anything else out there like this in all of California. The state inspector said that in his 30-year career, he'd never seen anything like this. A site like this, with the sheer volume of cremains stored in such a way, is truly one of a kind. So how did all these people end up in here? Well, the answer to that question is not so simple. I was initially under the impression that these were all unclaimed remains, but such is not actually the case. Some are, but many aren't. In fact, many specifically requested, or their families specifically requested, to be placed here in the vault. Some had no next of kin, others did have next of kin, but their urns were never retrieved or sent out to them. For some, it came down to financial limitations. This was the most affordable option. For others, this was meant to be a temporary holding site, with final arrangements never coming to fruition for one reason or another. And some may have just assumed that after their loved one was cremated that their ashes would have been scattered and may not have even known that they were placed in the vault. Cremation was a relatively new concept in the US in the early 20th century, and it was not always clear what would be or could be done with remains after cremation. Most of those resting herein are placed in simple copper box or even cardboard box urns. Intermingled with the standard box urns are some other uniquely shaped urns and repositories, each a literal time capsule from the past. Adding to the many mysteries within these walls were numerous very fancy and expensive engraved urns that one would assume were intended for private holding or placement in a publicly accessible niche, not storage in an inaccessible basement vault. Yet here they stand. There are as many stories as to why an individual's ashes are here in the vault as there are urns in these rooms. And for most in here, there is no written record to answer the question why. And though long-term storage of ashes like this no longer happens, this unique community of the dead, in the eyes of the state, is for all intents and purposes, a tomb. It is and will remain these folks' final resting place as is. Only through a permit ordered by family, or a court order in the case of no next of kin, may they be removed. In 2022, Chapel of the Pines began to undertake efforts to organize and digitally catalog the names and dates of all those resting at this site down in the vaults. Jessica Wall, librarian, historian, cemetery enthusiast, friend of Hollywood Graveyard, and owner of the blog Silence is Platinum, volunteered to spearhead these efforts.
Charles E. I can't read the last name.
Number one. And naturally, I volunteered to help. This is why we were granted access to the vaults, which, as mentioned earlier, are off-limits to the general public. To say the cataloging was a daunting task would be an understatement. While there's no way to know the exact number and the cataloging is still ongoing, we estimate there are well in excess of 10,000 sets of cremated remains here in Vaultage. As we added the names to the catalog one by one, some names dating back more than 100 years, Jessica called to mind an old saying, something along the lines of, "Each of us dies two deaths, the first when our body dies, the second when our name is spoken for the very last time." That seemed very relevant to what we were doing, and we tried to make an effort to read many of the names aloud as they were entered into the database, to bring these individuals back to life, if only for a moment. In scanning and cataloging the vaults, we had the added pleasure of pinpointing the final resting places of Hollywood stars from yesteryear, who have been hiding in here for decades. Let's explore the vaults one by one and see who we can find. Vault 1 is the original vault, once referred to as the dark room, so I felt right at home herein. The storage of ashes in here began way back in 1907, back when cremated remains were called incinerated remains. I guess in time they determined cremated remains was a gentler image. Over the next 50 years, these shelves slowly filled up, taking us to 1957, and well over 6,000 urns. Over that time, a handful of classic Hollywood stars found their way in here. Let's meet a few of them. Wilfred Lucas appeared in an astonishing 400-plus films between 1908 and 1941. The final 2 films he appeared in released after his death in 1940. Notable among them are roles in the films Modern Times and 1916's Macbeth. Wilfred was also known as a director, including Keystone comedies and an early Tarzan film. He lived to be 69. Stuart Paton was a noted director during the silent era. He's best known for the first film adaptation of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in 1916, which was revolutionary for its underwater cinematography. Early 20th century audiences were spellbound, many of them seeing an underwater scene for the first time. Paton spent much of his career at Universal, directing actions and westerns. He died in the motion picture country home at age 61. Florence Turner was one of Hollywood's first matinee idols. At a time when many actors appeared anonymously, as it was considered a disreputable profession, Florence became known as the Vitagraph Girl. Along with other early stars like Florence Lawrence, Florence Turner would help spark the star system in Hollywood, where their names drew in crowds to see movies. Florence would star in many of the prestigious films of the early silent era, like Far From the Madding Crowd and A Midsummer Night's Dream, as well as alongside comedy great Buster Keaton in the 1927 film College. Florence also wrote and produced many of her films during the silent era. But come the age of the talkies, her starring days were behind her, and her roles in the 30s and 40s were small and few. She retired to the motion picture country home, where she passed away at age 61. William Desmond was an actor known as the King of the Silent Serials. He appeared in more than 200 films between 1915 and 1948. Desmond became a major action and western star during the silent era, known particularly for his serials, as his nickname denotes. He continued making films into the sound era, but generally in smaller roles. He passed away from a heart attack at age 71. Resting just above William is his wife, Mary McIvor. She too was an actress during the silent era, and also performed on the vaudeville stage. Her first film appearance was in 1917's Patty O'Hara, alongside her future husband, William Desmond. The first of many appearances on screen together. Mary retired from the screen after marrying Desmond in 1919, save for a 1925 appearance in The Burning Trail. She died from a heart attack at the young age of 36. Her ashes were placed here in vaultage, but according to this removal permit on her urn, were meant to be sent to her husband. They never made it to him before his death 8 years later. We found her ashes on a nearby shelf and moved her here next to her husband to finally reunite them. Lastly, in Vault 1, we find Maude Fulton. As an actress, she appeared in a handful of films in the 20s and 30s, including Silk Legs, but Maude was equally well known as a playwright and screenwriter. In an era when screenwriting was dominated by men, she wrote numerous successful screenplays, including Nixon Dames and The Maltese Falcon, as well as the Broadway play The Hummingbird. She passed away in 1950 at age 69. Vault 2 is right next to Vault 1. It's one of the smaller rooms, covering the years 1957 to 1962. The remains of close to 1,500 individuals rest in here, and like Room 1, among them are a handful of stars. Kurt Newman was a director who previously had erroneously been reported as being at Home of Peace Cemetery. Truth is, he's right here in Vault 2. Kurt directed numerous films in the 30s through the 50s, known for low-budget sci-fi, westerns, and thrillers. Among his best-known films are Rocket Ship XM and his biggest hit, the 1958 film The Fly.
You'll be all right now. I know it's working!
But Kurt would never know the success of The Fly, passing away suddenly at age 50 just 1 week before the film's release. Alma Bennett was a silent film actress who appeared in some 65 films throughout her career, often as alluring vamps. Among her best-known films are The Lost World in 1925 and Long Pants in 1927. Her career ended with the talkies, and she lived to be 54, not 44 as listed here. Patricia Mallory was known as Boots Mallory during her career as an actress and model. She began her career as a Ziegfeld girl in New York before moving to Hollywood to appear in films. The following year, she'd be named one of 1932's Wampus Baby Stars. Her films include Handle with Care and The Wolf Dog, alongside Rin Tin Tin Jr. Boots was just 45 when she died from throat cancer. H.B. Warner was an actor in both the silent and sound eras. He was nominated for an Oscar in 1938 for his role in Lost Horizon. You also saw him in the perennial Christmas classic, It's a Wonderful Life, as Mr. Gower. His greatest success during the silent era was the lead role in Cecil B. DeMille's The King of Kings. Warner passed away from a heart attack in 1958. Heine Conklin was a prolific actor of the silent and sound eras, appearing in more than 500 productions. He's remembered in the silent era as a regular in Keystone comedies, with his distinctive mustache. He'd go on to have small roles in two reel comedies during the sound era, and would have bit parts in numerous classics like Modern Times and All Quiet on the Western Front. Noel Francis began her acting career on the Broadway stage as a Ziegfeld girl before moving to Hollywood. Early films channeled her singing and dancing, but by the 30s she became better known for tough girl roles, like in Blonde Crazy alongside James Cagney, and Smart Money alongside Cagney and Edward G. Robinson. Noel died after battling breast cancer. Philip Pinero went by the stage name Philip Van Zandt. As an actor, he appeared in more than 200 productions between 1939 and 1958. His notable roles include Mr. Ralston in Citizen Kane, Jose in His Kind of Woman, and he appeared in Three Stooges comedies like Bedlam in Paradise. Philip took his own life at age 53. There was one more star we had hoped to find here in Vault 2, who managed to elude us. Edmund Gwenn. So these shelves here correspond to the dates around the time that Edmund Gwenn died. Edmund Gwenn, of course, is famous for playing Santa Claus in Miracle on 34th Street. So we were hopeful that this is where he would be, but unfortunately for us, he's not here. So the hope at this point is that perhaps he was misplaced in a different vault, and we'll just have to stumble onto him as we continue to catalog the vaults. It's frustrating because all of the other stars that we have sought out in the vault down here have been more or less where they were supposed to be chronologically. But if we can't find Edmund somewhere in these vaults, then he may be lost forever. Vault 3, known colloquially as the Rose Room, was the smallest room, but the most emotionally challenging. It tore at our heartstrings, as I'm sure it will yours too, to know that this room is dedicated to infants and children. Herein are housed the remains of more than 2,000 infants who were stillborn or died in childbirth. Others were babies who only lived hours, days, or weeks. Tiny boxes and tiny urns, with names like infant or baby boy and baby girl. Little lives who were never given a chance. Little flowers never allowed to bloom. Vault 4 was the second largest after Vault 1. It mainly comprised the years around 1969 into the 90s, but was also something of a hodgepodge from the entire 20th century. It posed a particular challenge because it was the least organized. That was because half of this vault held cremains that had been shipped in from other locations for storage here. It seems that Chapel of the Pines became Southern California's universal storage site for cremated remains. When others didn't know what to do with them, they sent them here. Funeral homes and mortuaries were not allowed to store cremated remains, so if any went unclaimed, many of them turned to the Pines Vault for storage. We found boxes and urns here from just about every familiar cemetery and funeral home in the area, from the Forest Lawns, Westwood, even neighboring Angeles Rosedale. There were even some from out of state, and accompanying this array of urns was a panoply of curious stories. We found some with requests for placement or shipment elsewhere that were never fulfilled for unknown reasons, and with so many decades having passed, there's little the current owners can do about those. We found empty urns that were engraved. There were unknown remains. There was a sad story of someone who accidentally picked up the wrong ashes, so his wife's actual ashes are still here waiting for him. We even found a section dedicated to amputations from local hospitals labeled arm or leg of so-and-so. The stories in this room really did run the gamut. This was also the room where the elements seemed to have wreaked the most havoc. But amid the disarray of this room, we did manage to lasso a legend from Hollywood's Old West. Bronco Billy Anderson is considered the father of Western stars, Hollywood's first cowboy hero. He began appearing in films as early as 1903, like The Great Train Robbery. Bronco Billy would star in hundreds of silent westerns, many of which he would also write, direct, and produce. He paved the way for cowboy stars to come, like William S. Hart, Tom Mix, and John Wayne. In 1958, Bronco Billy was given an honorary Academy Award for his contributions to the development of motion pictures as entertainment. The last vault is Vault 5. It's a smaller room, but still stacked floor to ceiling 2 stories high. It comprises the years around 1962 to 1968, with close to 2,000 urns. Despite being one of the smaller rooms, it's packed with Hollywood history. And my nerves were tested finding some of them, climbing to the top of a rickety ladder that looked about as old as many of this room's residents. Vertigo, anyone? Hobart Henley was an actor and director during the silent era and early talkies. He directed the film that marked Bette Davis's screen debut, Bad Sister, in 1931, as well as Will Rogers' debut in the 1918 film Laughing Bill Hyde. And in front of the camera, he can be seen in films like The Evil Women Do. A few shelves away on this same wall is a name familiar to you fans of classic horror, Helen Chandler. She began her career as a standout on the stage in New York, where she was born, appearing in over 20 plays before making her way out to Hollywood. Helen is best known today for playing Mina, the female lead in 1931's Dracula, alongside Bela Lugosi.
Count Dracula. I had a frightful dream a few nights ago, and I don't seem to be able to get it out of my mind.
I hope you haven't taken my stories too seriously.
Stories?
Other films include Outward Bound, Christopher Strong, and her final film, Mr. Boggs Steps Out, after which she retired from the screen to dedicate more time to her first love, the stage. Helen died following surgery for a bleeding ulcer in 1965. According to her birth certificate, she was born in 1908, so she was actually 57. Straight down below Helen, in the bottom shelf, is a name familiar to you fans of the Marx Brothers, Margaret Dumont. As comedic foil in 7 Marx Brothers films, she's sometimes thought of as the 5th Marx Brother. Notable among her films are Duck Soup, Animal Crackers, At the Circus, and A Night at the Opera. Margaret died after suffering a heart attack in 1965. High on the wall to the right, we find Gladys Parker. She was a pioneer of female cartoonists in the 30s to the 50s, in an era when comics were dominated by men. In 1937, she created the character and comic strip Mopsy, which would run in hundreds of newspapers nationwide. The character of Mopsy was modeled after Gladys herself. In addition to her comics, Gladys was also a fashion designer. She passed away from lung cancer. Lower on this same wall is Tom Conway. The actor is best remembered for playing the Falcon in 10 of the popular detective series of films in the 1940s. He's also remembered for appearing in several B-horrors of this era, like Cat People and I Walked with a Zombie. Tom died from cirrhosis of the liver at age 62. Our next star here in Vault 5 appeared in several of the biggest films of Hollywood's golden age, and was one of the first we sought out down here. Thomas Mitchell died in December of 1962, so we came over to this shelf which corresponds to December of '62. We scanned all the nameplates on this shelf, but were disappointed not to see him. I began to climb the ladder to look at the next shelf up, while Jessica pointed out that there was one urn without a label on it, but found the label loosely slipped into a plastic bag. She said something along the lines of, "What do you suppose the odds are that it's this one?" She pulled out the label and read, Thomas Mitchell. I thought she was messing with me, but when she turned the label around to show me, I nearly fell off the ladder. It was indeed the urn of Thomas Mitchell. The legendary actor played Uncle Billy in It's a Wonderful Life, Scarlett O'Hara's father in Gone with the Wind, and he won an Oscar for his role as Doc Boone in the 1939 film Stagecoach.
Well, how are you, Mr. Haycock? Don't tell me, sir. I know, a familiar name and an honor name. I never forget a face or a friend. Samples?
Mitchell was the first male actor to win the Triple Crown of acting, Oscar, Emmy, and a Tony. Thomas Mitchell passed away from cancer at age 70. His wife signed off on his placement in Voltage after he died, so it was a conscious family decision for him to be here. He wasn't simply unclaimed. The family of Thomas Mitchell recently confirmed to us that since this is where he chose to be, this is where he will stay. Weeks later, before we finished up in here, Vault 5 had one more secret to tell. But if we can't find Edmund somewhere in these vaults, then he may be lost forever.
But I'm warning you, I don't give up easily. Good night.
September 11th, 1959.
Unreal. Ladies and gentlemen, Edmund Gwynn.
He's not lost. He's not lost.
He's not lost anymore.
He's just misplaced.
Wow. Unbelievable. What an amazing find. And he's in a nice urn. Jessica.
Look at this urn.
And in a beautiful urn. Jessica, what have you found? Talk us through what just happened.
I'm still in shock. I'm holding Edmund Gwynn in my hands in an amazing urn. I was looking through one of the vaults. This was covered in paper. And I just turned it around to see what the nameplate said. And I read Edmund Gwynn, and I said it out loud, and you didn't believe me. And so I
didn't believe you.
And so I said it again. You still didn't believe me. And I had to do like this, like hold it up to you. And we were both in shock. Like, it's still...
Because we had looked in every vault. He was not where he was supposed to be.
No.
Chronologically.
It was a bummer to see that he wasn't where he was supposed to be, but I did not give up hope that we would find him.
No, you did not.
I still had the hope that he was misplaced, he was mislabeled, something. And I'm still in shock that we found him, but I'm so happy that we found him.
He is no longer lost.
No.
After how long has he been hiding in a paper bag on a shelf?
1959.
Since 1959. And he was placed in this beautiful urn. Yeah. And so that begs the question, why did he end up in a dark vault for all these years? Over the decades, numerous individuals have undertaken efforts to bring those stars lost in the vault out of the darkness and into the light, where they can be visited and remembered. We mentioned Mae Busch earlier, star of Laurel and Hardy films, whose niche is right here in the Chapel of the Pines columbarium. In the 1970s, it was discovered that her ashes had gone unclaimed in the vault. The Sons of the Desert, a Laurel and Hardy appreciation society, paid for her to be inurned in this niche decades after her death.
I'll put you in jail first, and you too, with the rest of the sons of the sons of the desert.
In 2005, a biographer of the classic screen actress Anne Sheridan discovered that in her will, Anne had requested to be laid to rest in a Los Angeles niche, but that her ashes were still in the storage vault at Chapel of the Pines. She coordinated with her family to have her ashes retrieved from the vault and placed in this glass niche at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, some 38 years after her death. Anne Sheridan was an actress known as the Oomph Girl, and was popular in the 40s, particularly in films noir and crime dramas. She's known for her roles as Randy in King's Row, Cassie in They Drive By Night, Laurie in Angels with Dirty Faces, and the title character in Nora Prentice.
I like me just the way I am. Nora Prentice, 6 songs an evening and an occasional drink with the better customers.
Anne was working on the show Pistols and Petticoats when she died from cancer at just 51. Unbeknownst to us, at the same time that we were cataloging Vault 5, a group of fans headed up by classic Hollywood enthusiast Bob Satterfield and the Sons of the Desert had already initiated the process to retrieve some stars from the vault for placement in niches in the chapel upstairs. One day I was cataloging some of the last urns in Vault 5 when I noticed that Margaret Dumont's urn, which we had already cataloged here, was missing. This was a pretty spooky discovery given that Jessica and I were the only ones accessing the vaults regularly, but we were eventually informed by Pines that she was getting a new home upstairs in the chapel. In April 2023, Margaret's urn was removed from the vault after 58 years and placed in this niche just to the right of the entrance to the chapel, where you Marx Brothers fans can finally come visit her in her new final resting place.
I've been sitting right here since 7 o'clock.
Yes, with your back to me. When I invite a woman to dinner, I expect her to look at my face. That's the price she has to pay.
Margaret did indeed get all the jokes. This same group of fans who raised money to retrieve Margaret retrieved Wilfred Lucas at the same time. You'll recall that we had found actor and director Wilfred Lucas in Vault 1. The prolific actor was seen in more than 400 films, including Keystone Comedies and D.W. Griffith films. In April 2023, he got a new home, right here in this niche alongside Margaret, after 83 years in the vault. It was a thrilling moment when Jessica found the urn of Edmund Gwenn, Hollywood's beloved Santa Claus from Miracle on 34th Street, a role that would earn him an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor.
Would you please tell her that you're not really Santa Claus? That there actually is no such person?
Well, I'm sorry to disagree with you, Mrs. Walker, but not only is there such a person, but here I am to prove it.
He's also remembered for the comedy Mr. 880, which earned him another Oscar nomination, and for appearing in a number of Alfred Hitchcock films. He lived to be 81. Finding Edmund was something of our own miracle on Catalina Street. After finding his urn, Jessica reached out to notify the next of kin, and efforts are currently underway to give Edmund a new home in a niche at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, hopefully just in time for Christmas. As a fan of the classic 1931 film Dracula, I was particularly excited to have found the urn of Helen Chandler. Helen was actually the first star I sought out and found down in the vaults. Her funeral expenses were covered by the Motion Picture Relief Fund, and due to the limited funds, her ashes were placed here in vaultage. Having finally found her urn, I reached out to her next of kin to inform them. They were delighted. Helen had been brought to Chapel of the Pines by her brother and placed in vaultage, so she wasn't simply unclaimed. But in our discussions with the family, we decided that Helen might rather be in a place where her fans could visit her. With their permission, Helen's urn was finally retrieved from Vault 5. Helen, we found you a new home. Driving Miss Helen through the streets of a Hollywood that has changed quite a lot since the 1960s, en route to her new home. And that new home is Hollywood Forever Cemetery. With the help of generous donations from you, the fans, we raised funds to give Helen a beautiful new resting place, where she can be visited by those who love and remember her all these years later. And I'm excited to unveil for you the new urn and new niche of Helen Chandler here at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in the Cathedral Mausoleum, just down the hall from other Hollywood legends like Rudolph Valentino and Peter Lorre. So if you're looking for a special Halloween outing this year, come say hello to Helen Chandler, bright-eyed star of Dracula and darling of the New York stage, for the first time in more than a half-century. Hollywood loves a happy ending, and for us here at Hollywood Graveyard, this has been one of our most rewarding experiences. And I hope for you it's been enlightening, educational, and a little entertaining as well. As we wrap up our time today and close the vault, I wanted to thank our friends at Hollywood Forever Cemetery for helping us give a new home to some of those who have been down in the vault for decades. And of course, a huge thank you to our friends here at Chapel of the Pines for opening their doors to us and allowing us to tell their story. Chapel of the Pines wanted me to be sure to make it clear once again that the vaults are not open to the public. So if you'd like to come visit Chapel of the Pines, you can visit the public columbaria during regular hours Monday through Friday, but not the vaults. That said, the catalog of names of individuals in the vault is now digitized and searchable, link in the description below. So anyone doing family history can search the document, and those who locate family down there and would like to retrieve them and have them publicly placed or privately held, you can contact Chapel of the Pines about how to start that process. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.
Do I look like a Ghostbuster with this thing on my head?
You look really cool right now.
That's what it does.